Right by Them, a Magnus Archives fanfiction written by Esperosis and read by Ibis Podfic. Chapter 10. In the Night. The next week went fairly normally, as much as his assistants could likely tell. John had started working normal hours, something John could hear his friends celebrating in the break room in the mornings when Martin made tea. He had also been practically forced to stick to one statement per week, which John was managing easily at this point. Hopefully, he can convince them to let him go back to 2 per week soon. But none of that was really important. No, the important thing, the thing John had been waiting for, with nigh bated breath, was Sasha to return with news of Michael. With the fire suppression system switched from water to CO2, and John managing to acquire a few more fire extinguishers, he had done all he could without Michael's input. The best case scenario would be for Sasha to take his advice, avoid Michael, and then Michael comes to bother and or stab him instead. That way, Sasha can avoid the traumatizing encounter with Timothy Hodge. Naturally, this is not what happened, and a week later, Sasha sent an urgent text message to the group chat Tim had set up asking them to come into the archives. John, of course, could already guess what happened, so aside from a standard, "Is everything okay?" he left Martin and Tim to ask the questions. Within half an hour, they had all arrived at the archives to find Sasha, sat at a desk, a bloody cloth held to just below her shoulder. "Sasha!" Tim immediately panicked. "What the hell happened?" Oh gosh, Martin began to fuss. "Do you need stitches? We should go to A&E probably." I'm fine," Sasha reassured them. "I just want to give a statement." John immediately began to sweat. His assistants were insulated from the dreams. He knew that. He knew as long as they stayed here, trapped in the institute, they wouldn't suffer from John's effect on their nightmares. But he didn't plan for them to be trapped here for the rest of their lives. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" John asked nervously. "I mean, we should probably take care of your arm, Sasha." "Yeah, John's got a point, Sash," Tim frowned. "You're bleeding a lot." "I know, Sasha gave a shaky breath. "I just want to get everything down while it's still fresh. A few hours at A&E isn't going to make you suddenly forget whatever." Tim gestured at Sasha's wound. "This was." Sasha grimaced. "I know that, Tim. This is what we do, isn't it? Record down incidents of the supernatural? I just need to get this down, on record." Sasha looked into Tim's eyes, imploring him to understand, and John felt himself taken aback by just how much Sasha was of the eye. He always knew. She had always had a tendency to snoop, to dig too deep, to learn too much. But it was at times like these when he knew if she had become the archivist, she would have likely been a much better one than he was. She would have succeeded the first time. He viciously pushed those thoughts from his mind. Now wasn't the time to think like that, to wallow in self-pity. He had to think about someone else for once in his life. "How about," John began to suggest, "you let us take a look at your arm while you tell us what happened. Then you can write it down or record it later if you'd like," John suggested. "That way your arm gets looked at, and you don't have to tell me about what happened in your statement." And then Martin and Tim again. Tim pointed at John while still looking at Sasha. "I like that idea." "I still think we should go to A&E, Martin frowned. Sasha nodded, mostly to herself. "All right, let's do that." And so Sasha told him an oh-so-familiar story. A story John knew was going to happen. A story he did woefully little to prevent, and now Sasha was hurt. And it was his fault because he didn't stop it. It was truly laughable how he honestly thought he would be able to help them. Help anyone. "And then I came here, and I texted you all," Sasha concluded, ripping John from his thoughts. Tim nodded. "How do you feel?" Sasha looked down at the bandage Martin had managed to wrap around her arm. Only a few small spots of blood, booming on the stark white. "A lot better, actually." Good. Tim nodded calmly before bursting. "What the hell were you thinking?" Tim began to pace back and forth in front of where Sasha was sitting while he began to rant. "I mean, seriously, Sash, you see a freaky guy in a cafe window, and instead of just completely ignoring him, you go and talk to him? He could have killed you." Sasha averted her eyes, sheepishly looking down at the ground. "I figured if he was going to hurt me, he would have done it before I noticed him." John opened his mouth to retort that no, 99% of supernatural things would not do that. But Tim beat him to it. "Would have? Sasha, the dude is obviously some kind of insane supernatural stalker freak. He probably loves nothing more than screwing around with people. Besides, that's not the point. The point is, you should never have approached him in the first place." "We got valuable information," Sasha weakly protested. "We did, yes, but you didn't know if he'd help you before you approached him." "I'm sorry," Sasha wilted a bit more. Tim looked down at her and sighed. He sat down on her desk next to her and wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her into his side. I just don't want you to get hurt, Sash," he spoke softly. "I don't know what I'd do if something happened to you." John did. Right. John cleared his throat at the lump that had formed. "At least, we now know that CO2 is effective against the worms." "I'm still kind of worried about the whole calling us out by names thing," Martin frowned nervously. I assume it likely knows who we are, which is why it let you to talk to Sasha," John stammered. "That doesn't make me feel better." "No, I suppose it wouldn't," John rubbed the back of his neck. That's what's getting to me about this whole thing. Sasha perked up a bit. This Michael not only knew who we were, but also about Prentice and the CO2, and he decided to help us out. Why? Who? What is he? And what does he want with us? Nothing good, I suspect, John replied. But for now, we can't do much about that. So I feel like we should focus on the more immediate threat. I agree with John. Tim rubbed Sasha's arm. We know how to deal with the worms now. So what's the plan, boss man? We need fire extinguishers, John announced. The CO2 fire suppression systems should work, but we'll need fire extinguishers, as many as we can get a hold of. Fortunately, I have a company bank card, so we can go out and grab as many as we need. Will Elias be all right with that? Martin fretted. I am planning on buying the extinguishers and then sending him an email that I've done so, John admitted. Tim whistled. Boss man is going behind Dushard's back. What a rule breaker, he smirked. John rolled his eyes. I would rather have the extinguishers and a lecture about the misappropriation of company funds than all of us get eaten by evil worms. Tim turned his head slightly to the side and spoke in a loud stage whisper. Sasha, I think I'm starting to rub off on him. When do you think he'll stop dressing like a total nerd? Sasha giggled and replied back in kind. Give it a few more months, I think, John sighed. So, he continues, I only have one bank card, so we'll all have to go together. Gather your things, we'll take my car. Sasha opened her mouth to respond before a gleam entered her eyes, and a smirk tugged at her lips. Actually, I think I'm going to stay back and write my statement. I'm quite tired after everything. Tim, would you mind staying behind with me and keeping me company? Tim raised his eyebrow, confused. Sasha gave him a pointed look, and Tim seemed to understand whatever she was saying as the confusion transformed into realization, complete with an audible, oh. Yes, sorry, boss man. I should probably stay back with Sasha. You and Marta will be all right grabbing the extinguishers, right? Right, John frowned, trying to figure out what these two were playing at, but all he received in response were innocent smiles. John turned to Martin. Are you ready to go? Oh, yes. I didn't take my coat off when I got here, Martin stammered. Good, we can take my... John cut himself off and cringed. Actually, you shouldn't need to come. It's far past working hours, and I wouldn't want to drag you around when you could go back to your own flat and rest, or at least stay here with Tim and Sasha. No, it's fine, Martin insisted. Are you sure? Yeah, I mean, a weird-handed monster man just tried mentioning how we might all die by evil worms. I'd feel better if you didn't go out alone, actually, Martin admitted. John opened his mouth to protest, but instead, he just let out a sigh of acceptance. Martin was a caretaker, and a mother hen through and through. He knew it was useless to try and convince him not to come. If you're sure, John nodded. Tim called after them. Have fun, stay safe, and remember stranger danger, Tim gasped. Sasha, I can't believe you retroactively justified John's stranger danger talk. Oh no, Sasha groaned. Tim's preceding laughter was cut off by the archive door shutting behind Martin and John as they stepped out the exterior door and into the parking lot on the side of the building. There weren't many, or really any, cars parked in the lot, so getting to John's old beater was rather easy. Do you think they'll be okay? Martin asked as they walked. I have some CO2 extinguishers lying around the archives already, so if they encounter any worms, they should be all right, John reassured him as he unlocked the doors. And if that Michael thing appears? Martin asked as they slipped into John's car. Well, best case scenario, the CO2 is a universal monster repellent. But more realistically, I hope its benevolent streak continues until we can figure out how to deal with it or ward it off, John hummed as they began to drive away. Yeah, Martin fiddles with his hands in his lap. So, how are you holding up? John glanced at Martin. I'm quite all right. How are you doing? I'm good, I think. You think? Yeah, I mean, all the worms, they're really creepy, you know, Martin laughed nervously. I keep finding myself constantly checking my ankles, worried one of them burrowed in without me noticing. But, Martin's eyes danced between his hands and the side of John's face. I would feel it, you know? Or at least, I hope I would feel that evil worm burrowing into me. But then, Sasha said she didn't even notice one of them got inside her arm until Michael pulled it out, and I don't know. Now I guess I'm not so sure? It could have been adrenaline, John suggested. He was getting attacked by a whole horde of them, and adrenaline can act as a painkiller. God, I hope so. Martin twisted his fingers. It would really suck if they had some sort of numbing spit or oil on her skin or something. I mean, that's not fair, is it? They're already small and all. If they could just infect people without them noticing. Martin shuddered. John took one of his hands off the wheel and placed it over Martin's, stroking his thumb over the back of Martin's hand. It's going to be all right, Martin. That's why we're getting the extinguishers. I won't let you or Tim or Sasha get hurt. As your boss, your safety in the workplace is my responsibility. I'll keep you three safe. John risked a glance at Martin and found the man staring at his hands, eyes wide and face red. John felt his own heart rate pick up considerably and moved to pull his hand back, but a moment before he could, Martin tentatively threaded his fingers with John, gently holding his hand in both of his own. John felt himself flush as he curled his fingers around Martin's hand, holding it more firmly as Martin clasped at his hand. "Thank you, John," Martin whispered. "Of course," John breathed. The pair continued to drive in silence. The night was overcast, turning the sky into a black void, the only light coming from the street lamps as they painted the world around them in flickering yellows. John braved a few glances at Martin, his face a mix of yellows and pinks as the light moved across his face over and over again as the lampposts passed. Martin's eyes were soft, thoughtful, as he delicately played with John's hand. He held John's fingers, curled and straightened them, turned his palm and rubbed his thumb against the line. He almost seemed in a trance, his body completely relaxed, and his eyes drooping with sleep, as he maintained his wondrous gaze on John's hand. John, for his part, desperately tried to keep his attention on the road, and off of exactly how much he wanted to pull the car over and profess his undying love for the man next to him, and probably kiss him. Definitely kiss him. Eventually, they arrived at the 24-hour Tesco, and John couldn't find it in himself to fight back the disappointment in his voice as he said, "We've arrived." That seemed to snap Martin out of his daze, and he immediately dropped John's hand as John suspected he would. His skin still tingled with the sensation of loss, and John had to swallow back a myriad of sappy and pleading comments that wouldn't be appropriate for the place their relationship was at currently. Martin stammered, barely able to breathe over the embarrassment. "Sorry. If I had wanted my hand back, I would have pulled it away," John whispered, keeping his eyes staring dead ahead at the entrance of the Tesco. The car fell into silence, and John wondered if it was the right thing to say. Maybe it was too much, too soon, but John couldn't find it in himself to regret. He missed Martin. He missed Martin so much. And this wasn't Martin, but it also was. It wasn't his Martin, but it would be, could be, and he found he loved him just as much as he did when their breath mingled as they lay together in Scotland. He loved him so much. He thinks he'll never not be able to love Martin, any Martin, every Martin. He wanted to learn more about this Martin. What makes him the same as his own? What makes him different? He wants to fall in love with him all over again, in every way. He wants to find comfort in every similarity and adore every little difference. His emotions threatened to overwhelm him as he stared ahead, trying to convince himself the burning in his eyes was just from staring at the blaring artificial light. He opened his mouth to speak, but his throat was thick and heavy, tight with all the words he couldn't yet say. Oh, Martin finally replied, his breath barely above a whisper. John eyed himself. The hand he had on the wheel was clutching it so hard he feared it might break, while his other still laid completely lax on Martin's thigh, an invitation. Martin didn't take his hand again. It was still too early. "Right," John said as he opened his door and started to get out. "The extinguishers." Martin stammered as he got out of the car. John locked the car, and the pair silently walked side by side into the store, grabbing a shopping trolley as they entered. John saw the single cashier groan as he spotted their trolley. He silently apologized for the frankly bizarre purchase they were about to make. They walked through the aisles, garish products and blinding white lights, raising any sense of intimacy they found in the gentle darkness of John's car, leaving only the task at hand. "What about you?" Martin asked, looking at John as they searched for the extinguishers. "I'm sorry?" John asked. Momently terrified, Martin had been speaking, and he had just blanked him out. "Earlier you said it was your responsibility to keep us safe, that you'd, protect us. But what about you? Who's looking out for you?" Martin asked. John hummed. What did it matter? He was supposed to get hurt, but he knew Martin wouldn't like that answer. "Elias, I suppose," Martin snorted. "So nobody?" John cracked a smile. "He's a bit hands-off, I suppose." "Then we'll just have to pick up the slack," Martin sighed. "Just like every other time." John raised an eyebrow. "We'll keep you safe, too, John." Martin smiled at him. "We'll all look out for each other." John turned to look at Martin and found he couldn't say a word. Martin's smile was gentle, soft, shy, and oh so radiant. It made John subconsciously relax as he had to suppress the urge to lean forward and bury himself in his loved chest to breathe him in, safe and happy. John's breath was barely a whisper once he found it again. "Thank you, Martin." "Of course, John." Soon they found the extinguishers and piled every single CO2-based one they could find into their trolley, a total of around 15 or so. They rolled their haul back to the cashier, who looked just as bewildered by their shopping as John assumed he would. "Hosting a bonfire?" the cashier asked as he scanned each of the canisters. "Something like that," John replied vaguely. Martin nodded alongside him. They quickly paid and left. The cashier was more than happy to rush them out so he could go back to playing solitaire on his phone once they were out of view. Then came the task of dumping armfuls of CO2 canisters into the boot of John's car, and the dilemma of whether or not to take the trolley back into the store. Fatigue made the choice for him as he decided to just leave it in the corral and piled it back into the car. "Where to now?" Martin asked. "Well," John started up the car. "There's another 24-hour Tesco about 20 minutes away, which makes about 35 minutes from the Institute, so my vote is we head back now and get more in the morning. We already have quite a few." "I agree. I could really go for a cup of tea," Martin sighed as he melted into his seat. As would I. John sighed before catching himself. If you're, amenable to making me one, sorry, I shouldn't have presumed. Martin laughed. His voice bright as the streetlight shone down on his face, causing him to practically glow in every way. It's all right, John. I'm more than happy to make you one. You've been the one driving, so it's the least I can do. You're right. John flushed red as he quickly averted his gaze, staring straight ahead as he began pulling out of the lot. Thank you. It's all right, Martin reassured him once more. John just nodded, more to himself than Martin. He wasn't sure if the motion was trying to reassure himself, or if he was trying to vanquish the many images of Martin he had collected throughout the night from his mind's eye. They drove in a comfortable silence all the way back to the Institute, John with one hand on the wheel and one hand resting, palm upward, on the console between them, an invitation. Martin didn't take his hand again. It was still too early.